Grace, mercy, and peace to you from God our Father and from our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Amen. We are here in the Serving Challenge, looking what it means to have Jesus serve us and how we can then go serve like Jesus. And we've basically, the challenge is based off of Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 to 11, that we've kind of summarized into 5 words. So last week we talked about attitude, what was the attitude of Jesus, then we have availability, action, ability, and ambition. And so this week we are on availability. Right? So Philippians 2:5, this was last week, have the same mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus. So that was all about attitude. And this week, Philippians 2 continues. Who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing. So think about what this verse means right here. This is a deep verse. Even though he was in the very nature of God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing. So Jesus is sitting up there in heaven, right? Sitting next to the Father in heaven, ruling the universe. And I like to imagine him sitting up there in heaven, sitting in the most glamorous lazy boy you've ever seen, right? He's got the perfect seat up there. He's in charge of everything. He's holding everything together, right? He's in the very nature God. But he doesn't consider equality with God a thing to be used to his own advantage, and actually chooses to make himself nothing. He chooses to leave that and make himself nothing, taking on the form of a servant, taking on our humanity, taking on your humanity to be available to serve you. I mean, think about that. The God of the universe, the God who made the heavens and the earth, chooses to become nothing to serve you. Jesus intimately cares about every aspect of your life. Jesus intimately cares about you personally. So much so that he becomes nothing to be available to serve you. He doesn't stay up there in heaven and go, "Oh, I'm a little busy." But rather, he chooses to become available. He chooses to make himself nothing. And I think we have a hard time with that. I have a hard time thinking that God would love me that much, that Jesus would love me that much, that he would choose to make himself nothing for me. I don't know if anybody has seen this movie, Bruce Almighty. Anybody seen this one? I thought it came out a few years ago. I looked it up. It came out in 2003, so it came out 21 years ago. But long story short, it's a comedy with Jim Carrey, where Jim Carrey plays a guy by the name of Bruce, and Bruce is upset at God. That God isn't answering him how he thinks God should be answering him. So Morgan Freeman plays God, and he says, "Okay, Bruce, if you want to be God, I'm just going to give you a portion of what it's like to be God." And one of the first things that happens to Bruce as he starts to kind of have the portion of what it's like to be God is he gets all the prayer requests of everybody. Right? Anybody remember that scene? Like, in his mind is going nuts because he's hearing all these prayer requests. So you remember what he does? He goes, "Send them all to email." Right? So he sends them all to email, and it's like, you've got 1,527,503 unread prayers. So you remember what he does? He says, "Reply yes to all." Right? Because he doesn't have time to deal with them. Reply yes to all. So like millions of people win the lottery, on the same one, and it's like kind of chaotic because everybody gets what they want, and it's just kind of a mess. And I think sometimes we think of God that way, that God isn't available to us, that God is far from us. But that's not God. Jesus does not consider equality with God a thing to be used to his own advantage, but chooses to make himself nothing to serve you, to intimately care about you. And we see that with Jesus. Right? We see this time and time again in the scriptures with Jesus as he becomes available to you. We see this in Mark chapter 5 in our gospel lesson. I want you to kind of set the scene here. Jesus has just driven out demons and sent them into a herd of pigs. Everybody's like, okay, Jesus, like you can handle some stuff. You just drove out Satan's little minions. And so the crowds, they start pressing around Jesus. Right? Jesus is becoming this important person, and these crowds are pressing on him. And then what we find out in the middle of Mark chapter 5, the beginning of this story, is this ruler of the synagogue comes up to him, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he falls at his feet and implores him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come, lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live." Pretty important issue. Right? This man, Jairus' daughter, is about to die. We find out later that she's 12 years old. The crowds are pressing around Jesus. Is he going to be available to serve this man? And think about the stakes. If he doesn't make it, if he doesn't serve this man, his daughter, this little 12-year-old girl, is going to die. It's a matter of life and death. Oh, and it's a ruler of the synagogue. If Jesus really wants to make inroads at the synagogue, if he really wants to show people he's the Messiah, then he better serve this guy. This guy's got some influence. Is he going to be able to make it? Is he going to be available to serve this man and serve this little girl? And so he starts going towards the house. The stakes are high. It's a matter of life and death. But as he's going towards the house, the crowds are pressing in on him. There's this woman that comes up to him that has this strange belief that there might be healing in the wings of Jesus' clothing. And we find out that this woman, she has had a discharge of blood, a disease for 12 years. That's right. That's a big deal, right? for 12 years, right? It's a blood disease, meaning she's unclean, right? She's not able she spent all of her money on the doctors. She's bought all the essential oil. She bought the little salt lamp. She's like tried everything, right? She's prayed the right prayers, and nothing has happened to heal her. She's at the end of her rope. So she decides to travel. Some scholars say she probably traveled about 30 miles to come meet Jesus because she heard Jesus was coming through. And she's got this strange idea. She's unclean. She can't be with her husband. She can't worship God because she'd make other people unclean. But she has this strange idea. Maybe if I could just touch the fringes of Jesus' robe, then maybe she could be healed. And we think about that. We think maybe she's crazy, but actually, she's not that crazy because Malachi 4:2 says this. She would have probably read this. "The Son of Righteousness shall rise with healing in its wings. You shall go out leaping like calves from the stall." So healing in its wings can also refer to the fringes of your cloak. So she had heard that Jesus had healings in the fringes of his cloak, and maybe if she just got close enough to touch Jesus, she could be healed. And so sure enough, she goes out and she finds Jesus. Jesus, though, is on a mission. It's life and death. Is he going to make it in time? And she reaches out and she touches his cloak. And all of a sudden, she's healed. All of a sudden, as Jesus is on his way to heal this little girl, all of a sudden this woman who's been having this disease for 12 years, all of a sudden, she's healed. And so you can imagine in that moment the joy that this woman is feeling. And then Jesus stops and turns to her and said, "Who touched me?" because he sensed something had come out of him. He said, "Who touched me?" And I imagine that joy turned to fear. Like, what is Jesus going to say to me? Is he going to say, who touched me? I had a little bit of healing power, and that was reserved for that 12-year-old girl, and now I'm not going to make it. Like, it's all your fault. Is that what Jesus is going to say? That's what I would be thinking right then. But no. He sees this woman who's just been healed. He becomes available to her to completely restore her. So that's after she was healed. He says, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." He completely restores her. He isn't just healer, but he stops to completely restore her back to the community. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Jesus, even though it was a life and death situation, stops to heal her. He doesn't consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he makes himself nothing. And that's what Jesus does for you. Right? We're rushing around. We can feel like Jesus is rushing around, but Jesus stops. Doesn't consider equality with God a thing to be used to his own advantage, and he makes himself nothing and dies on the cross for you, that you might be raised up, that you might be completely restored. He stops every step of the way to serve you. He's available to you because he doesn't consider equality with God a thing to be used to his advantage, but rather makes himself nothing for you. And we can say, hallelujah. Right? That's awesome that Jesus would stop for you and me just like he does for this woman. But when I thought about this, I know Jesus does this for me, and I'm thankful that Jesus does this for me, but man, out of all the 5 things we're talking about, availability is probably one of the toughest for me. Because you know what? I want to consider equality with God a thing to be grasped. I have my own gods. And you want to know what my favorite false god is? My schedule and my busyness. You want to know where I feel valuable in life? It's how busy I am and the important things that I get to do. Can anybody relate to that? I think we've made our God our schedules, and I've heard that the opposite of this is true. I've heard a lot of people say when they get retired, they've lost a sense of importance and value in their life because of their retirement. They're kind of saying, like, what do I do? What's my purpose in life? Because I think our gods easily in our country today are our schedules, and I think sometimes we can go through our schedule like, okay, yeah, I got this important things to do, I got this thing to do, I don't really have time for that. Like, yeah, it'd be good to serve, but man, I'm not really available because I got more important things to do. And I'll tell you, this is like one of my biggest gods, right? I like to have an important schedule. And I was convicted of this yesterday. So yesterday, we were at a conference in Daytona all week, and I was driving back from Daytona in the van. I had all the kids in the car, and all of a sudden, my phone rings. And I'm actually going through my sermon in my mind as I'm driving. And I'm like kind of at this point in the sermon, and my phone rings. And I kind of told you at the beginning of the service who it was. It was the Florida Georgia District Disaster Response Coordinator, a guy by the name of Jay Winland. And he called me and he said, "Hey, Mark, how's it going?" I'm like, "Good to hear from you." And I'm like, I know why he's calling. There's only one reason why he's calling me right now. And so immediately what starts going through my mind is how busy I am this week. I'm sitting there thinking, oh man, I got a wedding this week. This next weekend I'm leaving for a week to do a mission trip in Belize. Like, I'm busy serving people. And he goes through it. He goes, "Hey, so we were thinking like Messiah would be a good place to host some disaster relief teams. Could Messiah be available?" And I'm like, sitting here trying to think of all the excuses why I can tell him not to be available. And then he goes, I said, yeah, I think we can have the space. Like, I got to talk to a few of our leaders. We got to figure this out and get some details figured out. But yeah, we could probably be available. We've got the space. He goes, oh yeah, and by the way, when the teams are there, it would be great if your congregation could provide them all of their meals while they're there. And I'm like, what? Like, that's a lot of meals. Like, when is this going to go to? And he goes, well, in the past, like when we did Irma and Ian down in Fort Myers, like we kind of wrapped up by Advent time. I'm like, Advent? Like Christmas? And he goes, well, maybe not that long. We're coming on Monday to assess the damage, so maybe just a week or two, maybe up till like Advent. We're not quite sure yet, but could you guys be available to serve? And I'm like, let me talk to a few people. But my inclination was to say, no, I'm too busy. I got too much stuff to do, which, by the way, thankfully, and maybe I called a few of you in the congregation, you guys didn't tell me that. You're like, yeah, we can do it. We can be available. Like, you guys aced the serving challenge this week. But my inclination was to say no because I was too busy. Because I was trying to make my schedule to be my equality with God, my God that was there. And the thing is, busy schedules don't actually give us any hope. And what I realized here is the end of my sermon, which I'm kind of going to give you, then I'm going to give a little addendum to it. So Jesus stops, right? He was busy. He was life and death situation, but he becomes nothing and he heals this woman. And guess what happens to that little girl? She dies. He doesn't make it. To the point that they're wailing and crying like she's dead. Well, what I've learned is in the gospel, there are these little beacons that point to the resurrection of Jesus. That God has the power even to raise the dead to accomplish his purposes. And so what he does to this little girl is he goes in with the family and a couple of his little disciples. He goes, oh, she's not dead. She's just sleeping. Little girl, I say to you, arise. And she pops up. And then he's like, oh yeah, by the way, she's going to need some breakfast. Get her something to eat. She's going to be hungry after what she's just been through. Like, he says that. But he has the power to raise the dead to accomplish his purpose. He can be that available. And so as I was on the phone with Jay, the disaster relief coordinator, that's what I was thinking of. Like, you know what I'm going to say tomorrow? I think I'm too busy for something, but Jesus has the power to raise the dead, to accomplish his purposes and make things right. And guess what Jesus has already done for you and me? He's been raised, right? We know the end of the story. All things are going to work out. All things are going to be made right. So guess what? That thing that you thought was so important that's at the end of the week, guess who's got it worked out? Jesus. Even if he has to raise it from the dead, even if he has to raise you from the dead to accomplish his purposes, he's got it worked out. And man, when I thought of that on the phone, it was freeing. Jesus, you got this. Jesus, you got me. Jesus, I can be available to serve. Use me as you wish. And that's my hope for you. That you reflect on this woman in Mark chapter 5 and Jairus' daughter. That you would see Jesus become nothing for you. That you would see Jesus rise for you. And then you'd have the freedom to be freed from your schedule. Freed from the God of your busyness. To not consider equality with God a thing to be grasped. But that you'd be free to make yourself nothing and be available to those around you. Amen. May the peace that passes all understanding keep your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus to life everlasting. Amen.